The night was supposed to be silent, just another shadow mission across hostile ground, but silence in war rarely lasts, and for Captain Elena Ward it ended the moment the ambush triggered like a sprung trap, the sharp rattle of automatic fire shredding the humid air of the valley while her small recon team scattered for cover, their mission to infiltrate a hidden command post already in jeopardy. The first bursts of gunfire cut down 2 of her men instantly, the rest pinned against jagged rocks with no clear retreat, and when the enemy floodlights snapped on, sweeping the terrain with blinding beams, she realized they had been betrayed, someone had leaked their route, and now survival was the only objective, though survival in this place meant little when the enemy were known for their cruelty and the prisoners they took rarely returned. She barked orders, voice steady despite the chaos, covering her men as they tried to retreat down the ravine, but in the rush a mortar round slammed into the slope, the blast tearing through the night with a bone-cracking thunder that threw her off her feet and knocked the breath from her lungs, and when she staggered up again, ears ringing, she saw that the rest of her squad was gone, either dead or scattered into the blackness, leaving her alone in the sudden surge of enemy boots and shouts. Hands grabbed her, weapons pressed to her head, and though she fought like a wildcat, elbows breaking noses, knees slamming into ribs, the numbers overwhelmed her, and the butt of a rifle smashed into her jaw, stars exploding across her vision before darkness took her. When she woke, her arms were bound tight behind her back with coarse rope, the copper taste of blood on her tongue, her head pounding, and she was being dragged across stone floors into the belly of some underground compound where the walls sweated with dampness and the stench of oil and mold filled her nostrils, the air heavy with the faint hum of generators and distant voices speaking in a language she barely understood, though their tone was clear enough. Mockery, cruelty, amusement at her capture, because to them she was just another prize of war, another enemy soldier broken and stripped of dignity, but Elena was no ordinary prisoner, and even as her body ached she was already cataloging details, the guard rotation, the weight of the restraints, the sound of weapons clinking against armor, because escape wasn't just a hope, it was a certainty, a fire inside her that no rope could smother. They shoved her into a dim cell with a single bulb dangling overhead and slammed the steel door behind her. But as her eyes adjusted she saw she wasn't alone. 3 other prisoners sat in the shadows, beaten, starved, their eyes dull, men who had long since given up, and when one of them whispered, "No one gets out of here," she met his gaze and whispered back, steady and cold, "I will." Because she meant it, because she always had, because surrender had never been written into her bones. The first night she lay still, conserving strength, listening to the rhythms of the place, counting footsteps, mapping shifts in her head, and when the guards came to jeer at her to test her will, she gave them silence, her face unreadable, which only angered them more, but she wanted that, she wanted them to underestimate her, to think she was broken, and when they left her with bruises and laughter echoing down the hall, she smiled through split lips. Knowing their arrogance was her opening, by the second night, she had already loosened the rope around her wrists with careful movements, using the edge of a loose brick in the wall to fray the fibers while the other prisoners stared at her with something like awe. Too afraid to hope but unable to look away, and though her hands were raw and bleeding, by dawn she had nearly freed herself, and she whispered a promise into the darkness, not to them but to herself and the ghosts of her fallen team. She would turn this prison into a battlefield, she would make the enemy regret ever touching her, and she would take them out one by one until every corridor in this cursed place echoed not with their laughter but with their screams. Why the third night? Captain Elena Ward had worn the ropes down enough that with one final twist of her raw wrists she felt the strands snap apart, and though her arms throbbed with pain and blood rushed back into her numbed hands, she pushed through the haze of dizziness and focused because weakness meant death, hesitation meant discovery, and she would allow neither. The other prisoners stirred, one whispering, "You're mad, they'll kill you," but she only gave him a sharp glance that silenced him, for she was beyond persuasion, already running through the plan she had memorized over hours of observation. Every footstep of the guards, every key turn in the locks, every squeal of hinges, committed to memory until the compound lived inside her mind. Like a map, when the guards arrived for their usual taunts, she slumped forward as though exhausted, arms hanging loose to sell the illusion, and when one of them grabbed her hair to force her head up, the sudden snap of her body was like a coiled snake, her freed hands striking out, fingers clawing into his eyes as he screamed and stumbled back, his rifle swinging down, but she was faster, wrenching it from his grip with a practiced twist, smashing the butt into his throat before the second guard could even react, and though he lunged she rammed the barrel into his gut, pulled the trigger, and the blast echoed like thunder in the small cell, the prisoner beside her covering his ears as the guard dropped lifeless to the ground, his chest torn open. In the space of heartbeats the room was silent except for the ragged breaths of the survivors, their eyes wide at the impossible sight of a prisoner turning captor. But Elena wasted no time on explanations, only stripping the dead guard of his vest, sidearm, and knife, moving with a precision born of years in special operations, her mind cold, efficient, and unflinching as she prepared for the bloody path ahead. She ordered the others to stay put, promising that if they heard chaos in the corridors it meant she was still alive, still fighting, and though fear rooted them in place, a faint spark of hope lit their faces, the first they had shown in months, because someone finally dared to strike back. Elena slipped out of the cell, dragging the bodies inside to mask the breakout for a few precious minutes, then crept down the dim corridor, the flickering bulb above casting jerky shadows across the damp walls, every sound magnified, every breath like a roar in her ears, but she steadied herself, her training sharpening her senses, and when she rounded the first corner she encountered another guard patrolling lazily, his weapon slung low, unaware of the silent predator stalking him. She struck fast, arm looping around his neck from behind, knife sinking into the soft space beneath his jaw as she clamped his mouth shut to stifle the gurgle, lowering him to the ground with a precision that was almost surgical, leaving his corpse in the shadows as she stripped his grenades and extra magazines, her arsenal slowly growing like the pieces of a puzzle she would use to dismantle this entire place. Moving deeper, she found the stairwell leading upward, remembering the route from the sounds she had catalogued in her head. The command center would be 2 floors up, near the heart of the compound, guarded but not invincible, and from there she could disrupt their communications, sow panic, and carve her way out through confusion and fear, which were her most loyal allies now. As she ascended, her pulse was steady, her breathing measured, her thoughts not on escape alone but on vengeance, for the faces of her fallen team burned bright behind her eyes, each step a vow that their deaths would be answered in kind, not with mercy but with precision and terror that would unravel the enemy from within. At the landing she paused, listening, 2 voices approaching, careless and laughing, and as they drew closer she pressed herself flat to the wall, counting the beats of their footsteps, then lunged out like a shadow breaking free, rifle cracking twice, 2 heads snapping back as the rounds punched clean through, their bodies collapsing in a heap that she dragged aside quickly, every move silent, efficient, merciless. She took their earpieces, slipping one into her ear, tuning into the chatter of enemy voices, and a grim smile touched her lips as she realized she now had their lifeline, their warnings, their fears, and she could hear the tremor in their tone when the alarm finally sounded in the distance, because they had discovered the body she had left behind, their shouts filling the air, confusion spreading like wildfire, and Elena moved forward into the heart of it, her figure melting into the shadows. A predator behind enemy lines, no longer a prisoner but a storm unleashed, and with every step she knew the truth. This compound would not hold her, this enemy would not survive her, and one by one they would fall until nothing remained but silence and her promise fulfilled. The shrill wail of alarms tore through the compound like the scream of a dying beast, red lights flashing against the sweating stone walls as boots thundered in every direction, soldiers barking orders into radios, panic already beginning to unravel the false sense of control they had lived under. And through it all Captain Elena Ward moved like smoke, unseen and uncatchable, her rifle tucked tight against her shoulder, her knife gleaming with fresh blood, her mind calm as she calculated every step, every angle, every chance to turn their confusion against them. The earpiece she had stolen fed her the fractured voices of commanders trying to impose order, their shouts growing more frantic as more bodies were discovered, and she smiled grimly to herself because the compound was no longer their fortress, it was her hunting ground. And they were mice scurrying in terror from a predator they could not see. 2 soldiers rounded the corner ahead of her, rifles up, scanning wildly, and before either could even register her presence, 2 precise shots dropped them where they stood, blood pooling beneath their bodies as she dragged them into the shadows, stripping one of a suppressed pistol and the other of a bandolier of ammunition that she slung over her chest. Her arsenal expanding with every kill, every victory feeding the fire inside her, and as she advanced she left behind not only corpses but fear, for each patrol that went missing sowed more dread among the survivors. She cut through the barracks wing next, moving silently between rows of bunks, the stench of sweat and unwashed uniforms filling her nose, and when 3 guards burst in, weapons blazing, she ducked low, sliding beneath the spray of bullets before rising like a phantom knife, flashing across one throat, sidearm barking twice to drop the other 2, her movements fluid, unstoppable, as though death itself had chosen her hands as its instrument. Her lungs burned, her muscles ached, but adrenaline kept her sharp, the faces of her fallen squad driving her forward, each enemy she killed another weight lifted from her chest, another ghost avenged, And when she stumbled upon the armory she knew the tide had turned entirely in her favor, because inside were racks of rifles, crates of grenades, belts of ammunition, and though she could never carry it all, she armed herself heavily, slinging a fresh rifle across her back, stuffing grenades into her vest, strapping knives to her thighs, until she was no longer a prisoner or a fugitive but a soldier reborn, loaded for war, ready to make the entire compound bleed. She planted charges she found stacked in a corner, rigging them quickly with the precision of long habit, timer set low so the blast would coincide with her next strikes, because chaos was her greatest weapon now, and once the explosions rippled through the compound, the fear would grow unbearable, their discipline collapsing into raw panic, and in panic men were easiest to kill. Slipping back into the corridors she moved toward the control center, where she knew the communications hub was located, the heart of their operations, and when she burst through the door, 2 officers barely had time to lift their pistols before she cut them down. Bullets stitching their bodies across the chest as sparks flew from shattered consoles, her boots crunching on glass as she crossed to the radio banks and smashed them with the butt of her rifle, severing their link to the outside world, trapping them in their own tomb with her, because there would be no reinforcements, no backup, no mercy. The first of her charges detonated then, the rumble shaking the walls, dust cascading from the ceiling as the screams of the wounded filled the air, and she used the chaos to vanish again, slipping into the ventilation shafts, crawling through narrow metal passages that echoed with her breath and the distant gunfire, emerging in the upper level where the commandant's quarters lay, guarded by a half-dozen men whose nerves were already frayed, their hands trembling as they gripped their rifles. But she did not attack them head-on, instead lobbing a grenade down the corridor, the explosion painting the walls with fire and blood as their screams echoed. And when the smoke cleared, she stepped through like a shadow, her rifle barking once more to finish the job, leaving silence in her wake. The compound was collapsing, its soldiers turning on each other in confusion, their radios filled with shouts of betrayal, of ghosts in the shadows, of death stalking them, and in truth they were right, for Elena was everywhere, her presence haunting every hall, every stairwell, every room, and by the time she kicked open the commandant's door, weapon raised, her heart steady and her face carved from stone, she knew the balance of power had shifted entirely, that she was no longer fighting for escape but for domination, and as the terrified officer inside reached for his pistol she whispered the names of her fallen comrades under her breath and pulled the trigger, the shot ringing out like judgment as his body crumpled, another enemy erased, another promise fulfilled, and still she was not done because the night was young, the compound vast, and there were many more left to kill. The compound burned with fire and fear, alarms blaring uselessly now as smoke curled through shattered corridors and the cries of wounded men echoed like a dirge, but Captain Elena Ward moved through it with the precision of a predator, her every step chosen, her every strike deliberate, her face streaked with soot and blood yet her eyes sharp and unyielding, and though exhaustion tugged at her body, rage and resolve kept her upright, fueling her through the chaos she herself had unleashed. She dragged the commandant's corpse into the hall and left it there on display, the pistol still clutched in his limp hand, because she wanted the soldiers to see it, to feel the collapse of their leadership as a blade twisting in their morale, and when they did find him their shouts of horror over the radios confirmed her strategy was working, discipline unraveling as squads argued, some demanding retreat, others swearing vengeance, all of them unsure if she was just one woman or something greater, a phantom sent to punish them. Elena stalked the upper levels next, rigging tripwires from scavenged grenades, propping bodies in doorways to shock and unnerve those who found them, turning every corridor into a gauntlet where hesitation meant death, and when she lured a squad of 4 down a side passage with a noise, she waited in the dark until they tripped her wire, the explosion ripping them apart in a spray of smoke and shrapnel, their screams cutting off as the ceiling rained dust, and she used the chaos to slip behind another patrol, silencing them with cold steel to the throat, her knife sliding as easily as breath through flesh. The radios crackled with panicked reports, some men insisting there were dozens of attackers, others swearing she could teleport through walls, their fear feeding on itself, and Elena listened as she moved, her grim smile returning because fear was the sharpest weapon she could wield, sharper than any blade, and she would grind it into them until they broke. She found the kitchen wing next. Abandoned in the chaos, pots overturned, the smell of rot and smoke hanging heavy, and there she set another trap, dousing the floor in oil before tossing in a small flare, the fire roaring to life as she slipped out the side door, the flames consuming the wooden shelves and crates until the whole wing was an inferno, choking black smoke driving terrified men into her waiting sights, her rifle cutting them down as they stumbled out coughing, blinded and broken, their bodies collapsing in the dirt. By now the compound was a war zone, bullets ricocheting off stone walls, explosions rattling the earth, shouts and screams echoing through the smoke, but Elena was everywhere, her silhouette flashing from shadow to shadow, her rifle never missing, her knife never hesitating, and as more men fell she felt the tide shifting further, their numbers dwindling, their courage draining, while her resolve only grew harder, sharper, forged by the memory of her squad who had been slaughtered in this place, their ghosts whispering in her ears that this vengeance was not only survival but justice. At one point she cornered a soldier in a storage room, his rifle dropped, his hands shaking as he begged in broken English for mercy, but she only stared coldly at him, remembering her men's bodies broken and burned in that ravine, and she pulled the trigger without a word, leaving him slumped against the wall. Another tally in her silent war. She stripped explosives from the storage crates, carrying what she could, setting more charges along support beams and key passageways, her plan shifting from simple escape to total annihilation, because if this place had devoured so many of her people before, it would never claim another, it would not stand when she was finished, and the flames would bury its legacy forever. Moving deeper again she passed the cells where the other prisoners still cowered, and though they reached for her, eyes pleading, she raised a hand sharply telling them in a whisper to wait, to stay quiet, promising she would return when the time was right, because to drag them into her war now would be to doom them, and she needed them alive to prove that survival was possible, that freedom was real, that hope was not just a dream. Further ahead, more voices shouted, an officer trying to rally his men, but Elena slipped through a side door and circled behind them, opening fire into their backs before they even realized she was there, her rounds cutting them down one by one, the survivors scattering, some firing blindly into the smoke, others dropping their weapons and running, and she chased those who fled, not out of mercy but to ensure no alarm was raised beyond these walls, hunting them like prey until their bodies littered the outer courtyard, the night air heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the stench of burning fuel. Explosions rocked the compound again as her charges went off in sequence, shaking the earth beneath her boots. Windows shattering, towers crumbling, the once mighty prison collapsing into rubble piece by piece, and through it all Elena moved steadily, a ghost in the inferno, relentless and unyielding, her mission no longer about survival or vengeance alone but about erasing this fortress from existence. And as she reloaded in the flickering red glow of fire, listening to the terrified shouts over the radio, she knew one truth burned brighter than the flames themselves: she had become their nightmare, and she would not stop until every last one of them lay dead. The compound was collapsing into fire and ruin, but not all of the enemy had broken, and as Captain Elena Ward moved through the choking smoke in the ruined halls, she could hear the shift in their voices over the stolen earpiece, no longer just panic and scattered fear but the bark of a new commander rallying the survivors, forcing them into order through raw desperation, his voice steady and iron-hard, promising revenge and survival if they stood together. And though she could not yet see him, she knew this man was different, a fighter rather than a coward, someone who would make the last stand costly, and that made him her true target. She crouched behind a shattered wall, watching through the cracks as at least 20 soldiers regrouped in the central courtyard, weapons leveled, heavy machine guns dragged into position, their faces still pale but their lines tight again, the flames painting them in red as they prepared for her, and she felt her pulse steady, her breathing slow, the old rhythm of combat settling into her bones because this was what she had been born for, not the chaos of ambush or the cruelty of captivity, but the brutal clarity of facing overwhelming odds with nothing but skill, will, and the refusal to die. She checked her weapons with quick, practiced hands, sliding a fresh magazine into her rifle, tightening the straps of her vest heavy with grenades, feeling the weight of her knife against her thigh, and then she studied the field, her mind sketching routes of attack, noting cover points, blind spots, weaknesses in their formation, because a frontal assault would be suicide, but she was not here for suicide, she was here to turn their last stand into their grave. And so she circled wide through the ruins, slipping into the old watchtower that overlooked the courtyard, climbing the broken stairs with quiet precision until she reached the top, the flames licking at the walls below, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes, and from that vantage point she saw them clearly, the officer at their center shouting orders, his scarred face upturned toward the tower as though daring her to strike, and she almost laughed because he was right to expect her there, but not in the way he thought. She planted 2 charges along the tower supports before crawling onto the ledge, rifle braced, sights narrowing on the machine gun crews, and with 3 precise shots she cut them down, sparks and blood flying as their heavy guns went silent, the rest of the soldiers unleashing a furious barrage that shredded the stone around her. But she was already moving, rolling back, diving through the stairwell as the tower shook from the impact of their fire, and as she sprinted down she triggered the charges, the explosives ripping the supports apart in a roar of fire and stone, the entire tower collapsing into the courtyard, crushing half their number beneath the avalanche of rubble. The screams of the dying drowned out by the thunder of falling stone. Dazed survivors staggered to their feet, some crawling, others firing wildly into the smoke, but Elena was already among them, emerging from the inferno like a shadow, her knife flashing across a throat, her rifle spitting death into their ranks, her grenades booming in the tight space, each explosion ripping holes in their line until what had been an organized stand dissolved into carnage. Men screaming, bodies flung into walls. The officer's voice rising above it all as he roared for them to hold, to fight, to kill her, and though some obeyed, their eyes blazing with desperation, they fell just as quickly as the rest, their bullets cutting only air while hers cut flesh and bone. She fought like a storm, every motion fluid, controlled, the years of training guiding her hands even as exhaustion gnawed at her muscles and the smoke tore at her lungs, and yet she did not falter, could not falter, not with the memory of her squad burned into her chest, not with freedom so close she could taste it. The courtyard became a slaughterhouse, bodies strewn in the firelight, blood mixing with dust, the acrid stench of gunpowder choking the air, and still she pressed forward until only the officer remained, his face streaked with blood and soot, his uniform torn, his rifle trembling in his hands as he leveled it at her, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of them, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, though. Which seemed almost blurred in the firelight. He fired first, his round grazing her shoulder in a flash of pain that made her stumble, but she steadied herself, lifted her rifle, and squeezed the trigger, the shot tearing through his chest and sending him sprawling against the rubble, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with disbelief as he realized his stand had ended in failure, and Elena walked up to him, boots crunching on debris, standing over him with cold eyes as he tried to form words, perhaps a curse, perhaps a plea, but she silenced him with a final bullet to the head, the sound echoing across the ruined compound like the closing of a door, and with that, the last organized resistance was ended, the fortress reduced to rubble, its soldiers to corpses, its command broken and bleeding in the dust, and still Elena stood, bloodied and battered but unbowed, the fire reflected in her eyes as she turned toward the cells once more, because her war was not finished until every prisoner was free and the world outside knew what she had done here. The courtyard was littered with bodies, the flames gnawing at the ruins, the acrid smoke stinging her throat, but Captain Elena Ward wasted no time savoring the victory, because the fight was not finished and her mission was not only vengeance but survival, so she turned her back on the corpses and pushed into the inner cell block where the other prisoners waited, their hollow eyes watching through the bars as she strode in with blood on her face and fire at her back, and when she smashed the lock open with the butt of her rifle the silence broke into whispers of disbelief, one man saying she came back, as though he could not comprehend it, another weeping openly, and though Elena offered no comfort she barked at them to move, her tone sharp and commanding, because hesitation would kill them and sentiment was a luxury she could not afford. They stumbled out, starved, bruised but still able to walk, and she shoved weapons into their hands from the fallen guards, teaching them in clipped words how to reload, how to fire, how to follow her lead, and though they trembled with fear there was a spark of determination in their eyes now, a spark she fanned with her presence alone, because they could see she was unbreakable and in her strength they found their own. She led them down the smoke-filled corridors, every sense alert for the last pockets of resistance, and sure enough the scattered survivors emerged from the haze, desperate men who had seen their fortress fall but refused to lay down arms, their eyes wild, their shots erratic, and Elena threw herself into the fight once more, diving into cover, returning fire with lethal precision, her prisoners turned soldiers following clumsily but fiercely, their bullets finding flesh, their shouts echoing off the stone walls, and though two of them fell in the crossfire, the others fought with a desperation born of freedom just within reach. Elena charged forward, knife flashing as she cut down one soldier who tried to rush her, her elbow slamming into another's face until his skull cracked against the wall, her rifle barking point blank into a third's chest, and when the last survivor dropped his weapon and tried to flee she put a round in his back without hesitation, because mercy in this place meant future death, and she was determined to end it all here, once and for all. She gathered the survivors again, forcing them into motion, pushing them through the outer corridors as explosions from her planted charges rippled behind them, collapsing tunnels, sealing chambers, burying the horrors of the compound beneath rubble and flame, and each blast shook the walls as though the earth itself wanted to swallow this place whole, the prisoners stumbling but pressing on, driven by her relentless will. When they reached the final gate they found it barred, chains thick across the iron doors, and for a moment despair threatened to break them again, but Elena strode forward, face grim, pulling grenades from her vest and shoving them into the hinges, shoving the others back as she shouted for them to cover, the explosion tearing the gate apart in a blinding flash of fire and steel that showered sparks across the night sky, the doors crashing down in a cloud of dust that opened the path to freedom. The prisoners surged forward, gasping at the taste of open air, the night sky vast and endless above them after so many months in darkness, and though some fell to their knees in awe, others wept openly. Elena only pressed them forward, scanning the horizon for threats, her body aching but her instincts unrelenting, because she knew this was the most dangerous moment of all, the escape itself, and she would not allow it to fail. Gunfire cracked in the distance then, the last desperate squad of enemies rallying at the outer perimeter, their headlights sweeping across the barren ground, and Elena threw herself into position, leading the ragged group into cover among broken walls, her rifle answering the fire with deadly accuracy, each shot claiming another life, her grenades booming across the open field, scattering their formation, and when they tried to flank she anticipated it, moving like a ghost through the shadows, striking them down one by one until only silence remained, the last echo of their gunfire fading into the night. She stood there a moment, chest heaving, blood dripping from her arm where a bullet had grazed her, the survivors gathering around her with eyes wide, their disbelief turning to awe as they realized she had carried them through the impossible, had turned hell itself into their road to freedom, and though they wanted to thank her she only raised a hand ordering them to move, because until they were far from this place they were still in danger, and she had no intention of letting them die now. They followed her out into the wilderness, their steps unsteady but determined, leaving behind the burning ruin of the compound that had once been their prison, its walls collapsing into ash and rubble, its soldiers all dead, its command destroyed, and as they vanished into the night, Captain Elena Ward led them with the same unshakable resolve that had carried her through captivity, ambush, and battle, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her mind already planning the next move, because survival was never luck, it was war, and she had sworn to win it until the very end. The hours that followed were filled with a strange, tense silence, the kind that pressed down heavier than any firefight. Aisha had holed up in the burnt shell of what used to be a school, its walls riddled with bullet holes, its chalkboards shattered and coated with dust. She patched herself up with the last strips of her medical kit, feeling the sting of disinfectant as it bit into the fresh wound on her arm, but her mind was elsewhere. Every breath, every heartbeat felt like a countdown. They knew she was still alive. She had made herself too much of a problem to ignore. And if she had learned anything from the weeks spent behind enemy lines, it was this: predators never give up when prey continues to fight back. They would come, and when they did, she would either finish this war within the shadows of their camp or finally fall trying. She stared at the map she had drawn from memory, lines etched into the concrete floor with a piece of chalk she'd scavenged from the rubble. The enemy headquarters was deeper into the valley, where old fuel depots had been repurposed into bunkers and command posts. The complex was guarded day and night, but Aisha knew their patterns, their blind spots, their arrogance. She had been patient, dismantling them piece by piece. But tonight it wouldn't be patience, it would be the strike that ended everything. She tied her boots tighter, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and whispered a promise to herself: no more running. No more hiding. She would bring this to their doorstep. As night fell, Aisha began her journey through the forest trails, every step careful, every movement rehearsed. The moon barely cut through the thick canopy above, giving her the cover she needed. She moved like a shadow, her senses sharpened beyond exhaustion. Every broken twig or rustle of leaves felt amplified, but she had learned to control her fear, to funnel it into awareness. It was fear that had kept her alive when others would have already been gone. By midnight she reached the edge of the valley. Below her stretched the camp, lights glowing faintly like a cluster of fireflies. Trucks rumbled in and out, carrying supplies and armed men. Watchtowers loomed at each corner, their spotlights sweeping in steady arcs. It was a fortress, and anyone else would have seen it as untouchable. But to Aisha, it was a puzzle with pieces already missing. She crawled closer, using the rocks and brush for cover. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing evened out, her body becoming an extension of the environment around her. She waited for the lights of one tower to pass, then slipped forward, silent as the night wind. A lone guard walked too close to her hiding spot, humming to himself, oblivious. She moved behind him swiftly, an arm around his throat, her knife flashing once. He slumped without a sound. She dragged the body into the shadows, took his radio, and whispered into it with the man's accent, imitating his casual tone. The voice on the other side grunted in acknowledgement. Another blind spot created. Aisha moved deeper, weaving through tents and supply crates. Every step brought her closer to the central bunker, where their commander would likely be. She had memorized his face, stern, brutal, the kind of man who thought cruelty was strength. He had signed off on massacres, on the torture of prisoners, on the very operation that had led to her capture. This wasn't just strategy anymore. This was justice. She planted explosives at key points as she moved: fuel trucks, ammunition piles, communication lines. Small charges, carefully placed, each one a match waiting to ignite a wildfire. She kept her rifle ready, but her knife did most of the work, her movements precise, swift, and merciless. One by one, the guards vanished into silence. By the time she neared the command post, the air itself felt different, charged with the weight of something inevitable. She paused for a moment, steadying herself. This was the heart of the beast, and she was about to strike it. She slipped inside through the back, where a maintenance door had been carelessly left unguarded. The dim hallway reeked of oil and sweat. Voices echoed faintly from deeper within, men laughing, boots scraping against concrete. She followed the sound, every sense stretched taut, until she reached the central chamber. And there he was. The commander stood at a table, maps and radio equipment spread out before him, barking orders to a pair of officers. His back was to her, his arrogance exposed like an open wound. For a second, Aisha allowed herself to breathe. She had imagined this moment countless times, yet the reality felt heavier, darker. She raised her weapon, finger brushing against the trigger. But then something shifted inside her. Ending him here now would bring a kind of satisfaction, but not the end she needed. No, she wanted them all to crumble, to feel the weight of their power collapsing. Killing him would be justice. Destroying everything he built would be victory. She lowered the rifle slowly and instead set the detonator on the table, sliding it across with deliberate force. The click of the device made the commander turn. His eyes widened as he saw her, standing tall, gun in one hand, fire in the other. For the first time he looked afraid. Aisha's voice was calm, steady, like the quiet before a storm. This is where it ends. And with one press of her thumb, the valley lit up in flames. The night was cold, the silence heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, and yet Elena walked steadily through the shadows, her senses sharp, her body tense but unwavering. She had come so far, endured so much, and now only the final stretch remained. She could feel the enemy closing in, desperate, reckless, their pride wounded and their command thrown into chaos by the destruction she had brought upon them. Every step she took seemed to echo with the ghosts of those she had outwitted and defeated, but there was no time to linger on the past, no time to count her kills or weigh her sins, only the path forward mattered now. The extraction point was a mile away, hidden in the ruins of an abandoned village, and if she reached it alive, then all the pain, all the blood, all the nights of fire and fear would mean something more than survival. She pressed on, her hand firm on the rifle slung across her chest, her knife glinting faintly at her side, her mind cold, sharp, unshaken. The first shot came from behind, breaking the silence with a violent crack, and Elena dropped low, rolling into the cover of a shattered stone wall, the bullet sparking against rubble where her head had been a moment before. She breathed, steady, eyes narrowing, counting shadows, listening to footsteps. They were not many, half a squad, maybe less, but they were skilled, disciplined, desperate enough to risk anything to stop her. She peered out, saw the faint flicker of a muzzle flash, and returned fire, short, controlled bursts, moving quickly before they could pin her down. She ducked into the shell of a ruined building, broken wood crunching beneath her boots, glass glittering like frost in the moonlight. The enemy advanced carefully, voices low, spreading to flank her, but she was already gone, slipping out the back, silent as breath, the hunter even when hunted. She climbed over collapsed beams and jagged bricks, moving swift, every instinct honed by weeks of survival behind enemy lines. Her body ached, bruises throbbed, wounds stung, but none of it mattered. She had learned long ago to move beyond pain, to live in a place where the body was nothing but a tool, the mind the only weapon that never faltered. She spotted one of them creeping along the wall to her right, rifle raised, eyes scanning, unaware that she was above him, crouched on a crumbling ledge. She dropped soundlessly, knife flashing, quick and final, pulling him into shadow before the others saw. His weapon clattered faintly, but by then she was gone again, sliding deeper into the ruins, every step carrying her closer to freedom. The others shouted, their voices sharper now, no longer calm, fear seeping into their tone. They had hunted her like an animal, but she had turned the hunt against them, and they knew it. Another came at her, reckless, firing wildly in the dark, his shots smashing stone and wood but finding nothing of her. She let him burn his ammo, let him chase her shadow, then caught him with a clean shot to the chest, his cry cut short as he crumpled. The last two hesitated, their courage wavering, and she used that pause, circling, silent, unseen. They pressed together, back to back, rifles sweeping, but it was too late. A grenade rolled at their feet, and though they scrambled, diving for cover, the explosion tore through the night, fire and dust swallowing them whole. Elena did not look back. She moved swiftly, breath steady, every heartbeat measured, until at last she saw the faint signal light pulsing in the distance, the mark of her extraction. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something close to relief, though she did not allow herself to feel it yet. She crossed the final stretch cautiously, wary of traps, wary of pursuit, but the night remained still, broken only by the distant groans of dying fire. When she reached the clearing, the low hum of a stealth craft vibrated in the air, its shape emerging from the dark, sleek and silent. She raised her hand, gave the signal, and the ramp lowered slowly, light spilling out across the dirt. For a moment she stood there, frozen, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The faces of those she had fought, those she had lost, those she had killed, all of it crashed against her mind like waves, but she held her ground. This was not victory. This was survival. Victory would come later, when the intelligence she carried, the sabotage she had wrought, and the fear she had instilled broke the enemy's strength. For now she was alive and that was enough. She stepped onto the ramp, the hum of engines rising, the night air rushing past her as the craft began to ascend. Inside, a soldier handed her water, another reached to steady her, but she shook them off, lowering herself into a seat by the window, staring out at the land that had nearly swallowed her whole. Her body trembled faintly, exhaustion finally seeping in, but her eyes remained sharp, unyielding. She knew the war was not over, knew she would be sent again, deeper, harder, further. And she knew she would go, not because she was unbreakable, but because she could not stop, not until it was done. As the craft disappeared into the sky, leaving the ruins behind, Elena closed her eyes only for a moment, letting the darkness wash over her, but her hand never left her rifle, and her spirit never faltered. She had been captured once, deep in enemy territory, but she had taken them out one by one, and she would do it again if she had to. The end.